Hey guys, what's up? So today we are going to be taking a look at how to turn our nicely textured objects for games and apply an ambient occlusion shader to them in Photoshop so that we can really control all of our shadows. So right here we have a quick object that I found on TurboSquid. It has pretty god-awful topology, so hopefully no one out there is working on something like this for a game. But it should do for this tutorial. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the UV texture editor. And what I'll go over here is that whenever you're going to go to bake something to texture, it's very, very important that you don't have any overlapping seams. And that's good working practice anyway, is never to have anything overlapping. But in this situation, it is completely necessary that you make sure that, let's say, this pillow is not laying over this sort of sham or rug. And that's simply because when we go to bake in this AO pass, it will be a lot darker in here where it's nice and sharp. But because the pillow was laying on top of this other UV set, then it'll have some dark shadows going straight through it, and that's sort of the opposite of what we want. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and set up our shader in the hypershade. There's two ways to do this ambient occlusion bake, or two easy ways. The first is coming over to lighting and shading and doing assign new bake set, texture bake set, and that works okay. You can get pretty similar results with it, but I prefer to use shaders because I know the hypershade better. And I like the control that I get with shader nodes. So when we come in here, we're going to go ahead and create a surface shader. And it's always important to have good naming conventions. So we'll go ahead and name this AO Bake, let's say material. And next what we're going to do is we'll come down under mental ray. We'll come under textures. And we'll go under MIB ambient occlusion. So that'll drop that in. And so now what we want to do is we want to hook our MIB ambient occlusion node up to the out color. And there's two ways to do this. One is you can click and drag all the way over to out color. And this is the easiest way to make sure that you drop your node in the correct place on the other shader. But the other way that you can do it is just click, middle click, come over and go ahead and click default. Or you can also control drop that. So next what we'll do is we'll go ahead and assign this to our object, and you can see it's showing up black, so the surface shader has been applied. And then we'll come in and we'll go ahead and do a quick render to see what that ambient occlusion shader is doing for us. We'll switch it over to mental ray. I'll leave everything else where it is for now, and we'll go ahead and click render. Alright, so you can see that with this shader, anywhere where it's nice and flat, where we're not getting sharp edges, it's all white, which is how we want it to be. And anywhere where we're getting these folds and creases, we're getting these dark shadows, which is accurate for what an ambient occlusion shader should do. So the other thing that I'd like to point out is this is kind of noisy, and that is simply a matter of coming into your hypershade and looking at your ambient occlusion node and just turning up the samples a little bit. I'll keep it on 16 for this tutorial just to keep things rendering quickly, but for some of your games later on, you may want to go up to 256 or even 512 for this. Alright, so next what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bake this out into a texture which we can use in Photoshop. So we'll come over to lighting and shading. You have to be in rendering in order to do this. Come over to lighting and shading, and we're going to do batch bake, and we'll open up the options. Objects to bake, we'll do selected, bake to texture. You can also bake to vertices, and what that will do is it actually will bake the color data into the object sort of per vertex. Multiple objects is fine. Bake shadows, we want to make sure we have that on camera. We want that on perspective. And then we'll open up use bake set override so we can play with these options down here. We'll do light and color. Surface front is fine. Again, with naming convention, it's good to have it be something that you can recognize later on when it saves this file out. X resolution, Y resolution, pretty simple. If you were doing a 4K texture, you would put 4096 here, but we're working with 1K for this, and that should be fine. I usually leave my file format on TIFF. You can use sort of whatever you prefer, but I found that TIFF works well for what we're doing. And then the last thing is fill texture seams. So if I open up the UV texture editor here really quickly, basically what that means is when you go to bake, it will actually put some color value a couple pixels outside of the line. Otherwise, sometimes you'll wind up with a black line along the edges of your objects because the bake didn't bake far enough out. So fill texture seams, I usually do 2 there. You could do 3 as well. It all works. So we'll go ahead and convert and close. Alright, so as we can see, our bake is completed, and now we have a diffuse texture attached to our object, which has those shadows that we saw in our ambient occlusion render earlier. And again, as you can see, it's very splotchy. That's simply a matter of turning up those samples that I mentioned earlier. So next we're going to go ahead and bring the image that it exports into Photoshop. And you can find where this image exported by coming down to your project window. It goes wherever your project was set. So this is where mine was set. Yours may be set in the default location, but we'll go ahead and open that up in Photoshop now. So we'll go ahead and open. And the first thing I'm going to actually open is the diffuse texture for my actual bed. And so we'll just go ahead and do the standard texture. So this is what my diffuse texture looks like for my bed. And on top of that, we'll go ahead and place our shadow. And you can find that in, so this is where my project was set, in render data, mental ray, light map, and there we go. So you can see I have 2 here. I rendered one out earlier just so that it would be higher quality. So we'll go ahead and use that one. So if you place it in the top corner, mine was only 1K, where my diffuse texture from earlier was 2K. So we'll just have to bring that up a little bit. And this is just a tutorial, so there's no need to worry about the pixels getting all funky. So what we'll do once it's on top is if we come down and go ahead and click multiply, and what you can see is anywhere where the object was white, we're getting a multiplication of 1 times the color behind it. So that's the actual math behind a multiply. So anywhere where it's 1 multiplied by whatever color is behind it, and anywhere where it's black, it's 0 multiplied by whatever color's behind it, resulting in this. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and save this out. And actually I already have one saved for this tutorial, so we'll just go ahead and apply that. So we'll make a new shader, we'll make it a Lambert. We'll come in and get our file, which is right here. So I had saved this out previously. And so what will happen sometimes when you bring it in is it will get all funky like this. It will play with the transparency. So what you may have to do when you bring it in, and this is usually a matter of having 2 different shaders attached. It doesn't really know which one uses the transparency. So you'll notice sometimes the transparency gets hooked up to something, and we don't want that. So if we come down and go ahead and break that connection, then we're back where we should be. And so now you can see here is our object plus the ambient occlusion shadows attached as a texture to our object. So what we can do, just to sort of get a look at the difference, is we can use the first one and we'll assign the old matte. And so that's what the new one looks like compared to the old one. And so you can see it looks a lot better. And now if you just bring it into something like Unity and throw in a directional light, it should make the object look great and really pop. And the other thing that I wanted to speak about, because we have our texture all layered in Photoshop, what that gives us is the opportunity to sort of play with the opacity. So let's say I didn't want those shadows around the pillow so dark. What I can do is I could specifically mask those out if I wanted to, and then come down and sort of change the opacity and change how light or dark that shadow is. And ultimately, that gives us a real control over our shadows in Maya. So that should be it. Hopefully this works for all of you. Please let me know if there are any issues, and happy modeling.